Hello everyone. I will be presenting the psychoanalytic therapy. I'd like to apologize in advance. I made changes to the presentation after I passed out the handout. So the handout you received on Wednesday will be a little different. The psychoanalytic theory contains the most well-known treatment modalities and also the most misunderstood theory. This theory is a model of personality development and approach to psychotherapy. No doubt you've heard of the influential but controversial founder of psychoanalysis, Dr. Sigmund Freud. Freud was born in Austria to a Jewish family but spent most of his childhood and adult life in Vienna after his family moved there when he was 4 years old. He entered medical school and trained to become a neurologist, earning a medical degree in 1881. Freud used his emotional problems to help formulate and extend the psychoanalytic theory. In 1981, Freud's attention was captured by a colleague's intriguing experience with a patient. The colleague was Dr. Joseph Breuer, and the patient was the famous Anna O., who suffered from physical symptoms with no apparent physical cause. Dr. Breuer used hysteria to help treat the famous Anna O. The studies of hysteria sparked Freud's interest in the unconscious mind and spurred the development of some of his most influential ideas and began the thought of psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis became established in America between World War I and World War II, when Americans traveled to Europe to take advantage of psychoanalytic training opportunities. The single major therapeutic perspective that was transplanted to the United States was ego psychology, based on two of Sigmund Freud's books, The Ego and the Id, and The Problem of Anxiety. This perspective of psychoanalysis was dominant in America for approximately a 50-year span until the 1970s. Sigmund Freud has many contributions, but the most significant is the unconscious. According to Freud, the unconscious mind stores all experiences and memories in repressed materials. Although the unconscious cannot be studied directly, there are several clinical evidences suggesting the unconscious. Those clinical evidences are dreams, slips of the tongue and forgetting, post-hypnotic suggestions, material derived from free association techniques, material derived from projective techniques, and symbolic content of psychotic symptoms. Some of these clinical evidences will be discussed later in the presentation. Perhaps the most impactful idea put forth by Freud was his model of the human mind, or personality. His model divides the mind into 3 layers or regions: the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious. Freud believed the conscious is where our current thoughts, feelings, and focus live. The preconscious, which is sometimes called the subconscious, is the home of everything we can recall or retrieve from our memory. The unconscious resides a repository of the processes that drive our behavior, including primitive and instinctual desires. Later, Freud came up with a more sophisticated and structured model of the mind, one that can coexist with his original ideas about consciousness and unconsciousness. In this model, there are 3 metaphorical parts of the mind: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the primitive part of the mind that seeks immediate gratification of biological or instinctual needs. The biological needs are the basic physical needs, and while the instinctual needs are the natural or unlearned needs, such as hunger, thirst, sex. The id is the unconscious part of the mind that acts instantaneously without giving much thought to what is right and what is wrong. According to Freud, two biological instincts make up the id. The eros, or the instinct to survive that drives us to engage in life-sustaining activities, or thanatos, or the death instinct that drives destructive, aggressive, and violent behavior. These two can either operate against each other through repulsion or combined through attraction. An example, if your id passed through a boy playing with a ball, the immediate urge to get the ball will drive you to snatch it by any means. This is irrational and may lead to the conflict between the boy. Thus, id is the source of psychic energy, a force that is behind all mental forces. Superego is related to the social or the moral values that an individual inculcates as he matures. It acts as an ethical constraint on behavior and helps an individual to develop his conscience. As the individual grows in the society, he learns the cultural values and the norms of the society, which help him to differentiate between right and wrong. For example, if the superego passed that boy playing with a ball, it would not snatch it, as it would know that snatching is bad and may lead to a quarrel. Thus, superego acts as a constraint on your behavior and guides you to follow the right path. But if the id is stronger than superego, you will definitely snatch the ball by any means. The ego. The ego is the logical and the conscious part of the mind, which is associated with the reality principle. This means it balances the demands of id and superego in the context of real-life situations. Ego is conscious and hence keep a check on id through a proper reasoning of an external environment. An example, if you pass through the same boy playing with a ball, your ego will mediate the conflict between the id and the superego and will decide to buy a new ball for yourself. This may hurt your id, but the ego would take this decision to reach to a compromise situation. Another component of psychoanalytic theory is anxiety. Anxiety is essential to the psychoanalytic approach. According to Freud, anxiety is a feeling of dread that results from repressed feelings, memories, desires, and experiences that emerge to the surface of awareness. There are three types of anxiety: reality, neurotic, and moral. The reality anxiety is the fear of danger from the external world, and the level of anxiety is proportional to the real threat. Neurotic anxiety is the fear that the instincts will get out of hand and cause punishment. Moral anxiety is the fear of one's own conscience. Individuals are said to have a well-developed conscience when they feel guilty when they do something contrary to their moral code. Neurotic and moral anxiety are evoked by threats to the balance of power within a person. These two anxieties signal the ego that unless appropriate measures are taken, the danger may increase until the ego is overthrown. When the ego cannot control anxiety by irrational and direct methods, it relies on the ego defense mechanisms. The ego defense mechanisms help the individual cope with anxiety and prevent the ego from being overwhelmed. Defenses are normal behaviors that may have adaptive value provided they do not become a style of life that enables the individual to avoid facing reality. Defense mechanisms have two characteristics in common. They either deny or distort reality, and they operate in an unconscious level. There are 11 ego defense mechanisms described in Table 4.1 on pages 67 and 68. I will briefly mention them here. The first one is repression. Repression is the unconscious mechanism in which the ego pushes disturbing or threatening thoughts out of consciousness. Freud explained repression as an involuntary removal of something from the conscience. Denial. The ego blocks upsetting or overwhelming experiences from awareness, causing the individual to refuse to acknowledge or believe what is happening. Reaction formation is actively expressing the opposite impulse when confronted with a threatening impulse. Projection. The ego's attempt to solve discomfort by attributing the individual's unacceptable thoughts, feelings, and motives to another person. Displacement. A mechanism by which the individual can satisfy an impulse by acting on a substitute object or person in a socially unacceptable way. For example, releasing frustration directly towards your boss on your spouse instead. Rationalization is the manufacturing good reasons to explain why the ego is bruised. Sublimation. Similar to displacement, the defense mechanism involves satisfying an impulse by acting on a substitute, but in a socially acceptable way. An example would be channeling energy into work or a constructive hobby. Regression, a defense mechanism in which the individual moves backward in development in order to cope with stress. An example would be when an overwhelmed adult acts like a child. Introjection is taking in and swallowing the values and standards of others. Identification is identifying with successful causes, organizations, or people in the hope that you will be perceived as worthwhile. And the last one is compensation. It is masking perceived weakness or developing certain positive traits to make up for limitations. Freud's psychosexual stages and Erikson's psychosocial stages both made significant contributions to the understanding of the psychoanalytic model. Freud proposed that children develop in 5 distinct stages, each focused on a different source of pleasure. The first year of life, Freud believed children go through the oral stage. This is where children seek pleasure from the mouth, such as sucking, biting, and chewing. Ages 1 through 3, Freud believed children go through the anal stage, where they seek pleasure from the anus. This is also coping with demands for control. Ages 3 through 6 years old is the phallic stage, and the child seeks pleasure from the genitals, also coping with incestuous sexual feelings. The 4th stage occurs ages 6 through puberty and is called the latent stage. The child has little or no sexual motivation. They also call this the identification process, and it's where children develop the identity gender. And the last stage is the 5th stage, occurs puberty on up, and it is called the genital stage. The child seeks pleasure from sexual interest. When a child's needs are not adequately met during these stages, an individual may become fixated at that stage and behave in psychologically immature ways later in life. Freudian's view of human nature is sexual and aggressive drives are what determines a person's behavior. Erik Erikson expanded on Freud's psychosexual stages by stressing the psychosocial aspects of development. Erikson's psychosocial stages explains basic psychological and social tasks that need to be mastered in intervals from infancy to old age. Erikson describes development in terms of the entire lifespan, divided by specific crises to be resolved. There are 8 crises in Erikson's psychosocial stages. The first is trust versus mistrust. Infants develop a sense of trust if basic physical and emotional needs are met. If these basic needs are not met, infants develop a sense of mistrust towards the world, especially towards interpersonal relationships. The second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. The basic struggle in this stage is between a sense of self-reliance and a sense of self-doubt. The third stage is the inattentive versus guilt. The basic task is to achieve a sense of compliance and inattentive if children are given freedom to select personally meaningful activities. They tend to develop a positive view of self and follow through with their projects. If not, they refrain from taking an active stance and allow others to choose for them. The fourth stage, industry versus inferiority. Individuals need to achieve a sense of industry, which refers to setting and attaining personal goals. Failure to do so results in a sense of inadequacy. The fifth stage, identity versus role confusion. Major conflict centers on clarification of self-identity, life goals, and life's meaning. Failure to achieve results would end in role confusion. The sixth stage, intimacy versus isolation. The task is to form intimate relationships. Failure to achieve can lead to alienation and isolation. The seventh stage, generativity versus stagnation. Need to go beyond self and family and be involved in helping the next generation. Failure to achieve a sense of productivity often leads to stagnation. The last psychosocial stage is integrity versus despair. During this stage, individuals look back on life with few regrets and feels personally worthwhile. Failure to achieve can lead to feelings of despair, hopelessness, guilt, resentment, and self-rejection. Pages 70 and 71 provides a table comparing Freud's psychosexual views and Erikson's psychosocial views. By taking a combined psychosexual and psychosocial perspective, counselors have a helpful conceptual framework for understanding developmental issues as they appear in therapy. Now let's look at the therapeutic goals. The main goal of psychoanalytic therapy is the increased adaptive functioning, which involves the reduction of symptoms and the resolution of conflicts. Freud had 2 goals in mind, and they are: make unconscious conscious, and to strengthen the ego so that behavior is based more on reality and less on instinctual cravings or irrational guilt. Therapeutic methods are used to bring out unconscious material. Childhood experiences are reconstructed, discussed, interpreted, and analyzed. The therapeutic approach is sometimes called the blank screen approach. The analyst assumes an anonymous stance. The analyst engages in very little self-disclosure and maintains a neutrality to foster a transference relationship. There are 6 basic techniques in psychoanalytic therapy. Those techniques are aimed at increasing awareness, fostering insights into the client's behavior, and understanding the meanings of symptoms. These techniques provide a picture of the relationship between the therapist and client. The 6 basic techniques of psychoanalytic therapy are maintaining the analytic framework, free association, interpretation, dream analysis, analysis of resistance, and analysis of transference. Maintaining framework refers to a whole range of procedural and stylistic factors such as analyst relative to be anonymous, maintaining a neutral and objectivity, the regular and consistency of meetings, and avoid giving therapists views. Free association is the central technique of psychoanalytic therapy and plays a key role in maintaining the analytic framework. In free association, clients are encouraged to say whatever comes to mind, regardless of how painful, silly, trivial, illogical, or irrelevant it may seem. This technique is the basic tool to open the door to unconscious wishes, fantasies, conflicts, and motivations. This technique often leads to some recollection of past experiences and at times release of intense feelings that have been blocked. Interpretation is the verbal communication between an analyst and client, in which the analyst discusses their hypothesis of the client's unconscious conflicts. Generally, the analyst will help the client see the defense mechanism they are using, then the context of the defense mechanism, or the impulsive relationship against which the mechanism was developed, and finally the client's motivation for this mechanism. Dream analysis. Dream analysis was a well-known concept for Freud, and he believed in the significance of dreams. He believed that analyzing one's dreams can give valuable insight into the unconscious mind. Analysis of resistance. Resistance is anything that works against the progress of therapy and prevents the client from producing previously unconscious material. Freud viewed resistance as an unconscious dynamic that people use to defend against the intolerable anxiety and pain that would arise if awareness of repressed impulses and feelings are present. Resistances are not something to overcome. Resistances are representatives of usual defense approach in daily life. They need to be recognized as devices that defend against anxiety, but interfere with the ability to accept change that could lead to experiencing a more gratifying life. Analysis of transference. Transference is the term for the unconscious reputation in the here and now of conflicts from the client's past. Transference analysis refers to the symptomatic analysis of the transference implications of the patient's total verbal and nonverbal manifestations in the hours, as well as the client's direct and implicit communicative efforts to influence the analyst in a certain direction. This analysis of the patient's transference is an essential component of psychoanalysis and is the main driver of change in treatment. In transference analysis, the analyst takes note of all communication, both verbal and nonverbal. The client engages in and puts together a theory on what led to the defensive mechanisms he or she displays, which form the basis for any attempts to change behavior or character of the client. Now, when to terminate a session. If there's an agreement between the client and analyst that symptoms and core conflicts have resolved, when there's a clarification and acceptance of remaining emotional problems, when the client understands the historical roots of difficulties, when the client has mastered core themes, when the client realized environment affects them and they affect the environment, when the client achieves reduction of defensiveness, and the client can integrate awareness of past experiences with present relationships. Freud's view of personality has been influential to others, such as Carl Jung. Carl was a student of Freud's, and he focused on the unconscious, as did Freud. However, had a different conception of unconscious. Especially, he did not agree with Freud's theory of sexuality. Carl Jung's analytic psychology is an elaborate explanation of human nature that combines ideas from history, mythology, anthropology, and religion. Carl emphasized psychological changes that are associated with midlife. Carl believed at midlife we need to let go of many of the values and behaviors that guided the first half of our life and confront our unconscious. The textbook mentioned contemporary trends to psychoanalysis. Neo-Freudian writers moved away from the intra-psychic conflicts and incorporated culture and social influences on personality. Just some closing thoughts. After reading about and listening to this presentation, do you feel psychoanalysis should be thought of as the past? What aspect of Freud's psychoanalytic theory would you adapt as part of your own counseling theory, if any? This concludes my presentation of psychoanalytic therapy. Hope you enjoyed.